As a male blogger who spent the last decade writing about relationships and personal growth, I've heard countless stories of women discovering their strength in the most unexpected moments. But Sarah's story, well, it's the one that changed how I think about marriage, control, and the quiet courage it takes to reclaim your life. I met Sarah Mitchell 3 years after her divorce was finalized, when she was already rebuilding her life as a successful art teacher and advocate for domestic abuse survivors. But the story she told me began on a warm June evening at a charity gala in her former Malibu home, with the sound of something precious hitting chlorinated water. "You have to understand," Sarah told me over coffee in her cozy Santa Monica apartment, her 6-month-old daughter Emma gurgling happily in her lap. "I thought I was living the dream. Beautiful home, financial security, a husband who was successful and respected in the community. From the outside, we looked perfect. But perfection, as Sarah learned, can be the most dangerous prison of all." The charity gala was one of those glittering Los Angeles affairs where tech millionaires and their wives gathered to write checks and network over champagne. Sarah had organized dozens of these events during her 22-year marriage to tech mogul David Mitchell, always playing the perfect hostess while her husband conducted business disguised as philanthropy. At 8 months pregnant, Sarah was exhausted but determined to fulfill her social obligations. The flowing navy dress she'd chosen barely concealed her swollen belly, and baby Emma, though she didn't know her daughter's name yet, was unusually active, responding to her mother's stress with constant movement. I was standing by the pool, talking to some board members' wives about the silent auction, Sarah recalled, absently stroking Emma's soft hair, when I mentioned that we might need to scale back our hosting duties after the baby arrived. "Just temporarily, while I recovered." That's when David appeared at her elbow, his smile cold despite the warm evening air. "Sarah, darling," he said with that tone she'd learned to fear over 2 decades of marriage. "We've discussed this. There's no reason to change our commitments just because you're having a baby." Sarah's friend Jennifer Chen, wife of David's business partner, shifted uncomfortably. The tension between the Mitchells had become increasingly obvious to their social circle, though no one knew quite how to address it. "I just think it would be wise to take things slowly for the first few months," Sarah replied carefully, one hand moving protectively to her belly. "Dr. Williams says rest is important after delivery." David's laugh carried no warmth. "Dr. Williams doesn't run our social calendar. I do." It was then that Sarah made the mistake of asserting herself publicly. "Actually, David, I think I should have some say in my own recovery timeline." The words hung in the air like a challenge. Around them, 50 of Los Angeles' most influential couples continued their conversations about stock portfolios and real estate investments, unaware that they were about to witness something that would haunt Sarah for months to come. David's face flushed red above his perfectly knotted designer tie. Without warning, he reached for Sarah's left hand and twisted off her grandmother's jade ring, the one that had survived the Cultural Revolution, hidden in a jar of rice for 3 years, while Sarah's grandmother fled persecution in China. "Maybe this will help you remember who makes the decisions in this family," David said, and threw the ring into the pool. The splash echoed across the deck like a gunshot, silencing every conversation. Sarah watched in horror as her most precious possession disappeared beneath the surface, taking with it not just a family heirloom, but her last illusions about her marriage. "Did you just throw my grandmother's ring in the pool?" Sarah's voice was barely a whisper, but in the sudden quiet, everyone heard her. David straightened his tie and smiled that cold smile she'd learned to recognize as pure manipulation. "Maybe now you'll understand I'm serious about ending this ridiculous pregnancy." The words hit like ice water. Sarah felt every pair of eyes on her swollen form. The Los Angeles elite, suddenly uncomfortable witnesses to private cruelty made public. Emma kicked hard, as if protesting her father's words. "That ring survived war. David, it was all my grandmother had when she came to America." Sarah's hand moved instinctively to protect the life growing inside her. "It's irreplaceable." David's laugh was theatrical, performed for their audience. "Well, it's gone now, just like this marriage will be if you don't get rid of that thing." He gestured dismissively toward her pregnant belly. A shocked gasp rippled through the crowd. Mrs. Henderson from the country club dropped her champagne flute, and the sound of shattering crystal punctuated the moment like an exclamation point. It was then that an unexpected hero emerged from the periphery of the scene. "Ma'am," said a quiet voice, "I can help you get that ring back." Sarah turned to see the pool maintenance worker, a man in his late 30s with kind eyes and the sort of calm presence that comes from having seen enough of life to know what really matters. He wore the simple uniform of the service company, but something about his posture suggested he was more than hired help. "Excuse me." David spun around, his face flushing deeper red. "No one asked for your opinion, pool boy." "Actually," the man replied with surprising authority, "I think everyone here would agree that throwing a pregnant woman's family heirloom in a pool crosses several lines. I'm Michael Rodriguez, and I'd be happy to retrieve your ring, Mrs. Mitchell." Sarah felt tears threatening to spill. In 22 years of marriage, no stranger had ever stood up for her against David's public humiliation tactics. The kindness in Michael's voice was like a lifeline thrown to someone drowning. "I don't want to cause more trouble," Sarah whispered. "Ma'am," Michael said clearly, his voice carrying across the now silent deck, "the only trouble here is a grown man terrorizing his pregnant wife at a charity event." The accusation hung in the air like smoke. David's business partner, James Harrison, appeared at his elbow with the urgency of someone trying to prevent a complete social disaster. "David, maybe we should continue this conversation privately," James murmured. "People are starting to record this." For the first time, David seemed to realize that his mask had slipped in front of witnesses who mattered to his business reputation and political aspirations. The irony wasn't lost on Sarah that his narcissistic cruelty had finally been exposed at exactly the moment when maintaining his public image was most crucial. "This isn't over," David hissed at Sarah before stalking toward the mansion, leaving his pregnant wife standing beside the pool with 50 witnesses and a stranger offering to dive into chlorinated water to retrieve her grandmother's ring. As Michael began rolling up his sleeves, Sarah realized that something fundamental had shifted. The man who'd controlled every aspect of her life for over 2 decades had just revealed his true character to an audience of influential witnesses, while a complete stranger was preparing to risk his safety to return something precious to her. "Mrs. Mitchell," Michael said quietly as he prepared to dive, "after I get this ring back, I think we might need to have a different kind of conversation, one about making sure you and your baby stay safe." There was something in his tone that made Sarah study his face more carefully. This wasn't just kindness from a pool maintenance worker. This was something else entirely. As Michael dove cleanly into the pool, Sarah felt Emma kick again, softer this time. Almost like approval. For the first time in months, the tightness in her chest might actually be hope. When Michael surfaced with the ring glinting in his outstretched hand, water streaming from his dark hair, Sarah accepted it with trembling fingers. The jade felt warm, as if it had absorbed not just sunlight, but her grandmother's strength and determination. "Thank you," she said simply. "Mrs. Mitchell," Michael replied as he climbed out of the pool, "I think we should talk, but not here, and not tonight. When you're ready." He handed her a business card, and Sarah's world tilted on its axis. The card read, "Michael Rodriguez, attorney at law, specializing in family law and high-asset divorce." Her millionaire husband had just humiliated her in front of a divorce lawyer who moonlighted as pool maintenance to stay grounded in real-world problems. The universe, it seemed, had a sense of timing that bordered on the miraculous. As the guests gradually departed and staff cleaned up the remnants of the charity gala, Sarah stood alone by the pool, turning Michael's business card over in her hands. 22 years of marriage, and she was finally seeing clearly. Her grandmother's ring caught the last rays of sunlight, sending small rainbows dancing across the water's surface. Some treasures, Sarah realized, were worth fighting for. And for the first time in months, she smiled. 3 days after the charity gala, Sarah sat in her art studio, a converted bedroom in the mansion's east wing that David tolerated because it kept her busy and out of real business, staring at a half-finished painting of a woman standing at the edge of a cliff. She'd been working on this piece for months without realizing it was a self-portrait of her own crossroads. The baby was quieter today, as if sensing her mother's need for contemplation. Emma seemed to understand that major decisions were being considered, life-altering choices that would determine both their futures. Sarah's phone buzzed with a text from her best friend, Jennifer Chen. Coffee today. You've been different since the gala. Want to talk? Instead of responding immediately, Sarah studied the painting more carefully. The woman at the cliff's edge had multiple paths leading away from the precipice escape routes she'd been unconsciously painting for years. Had her subconscious been preparing for this moment long before her conscious mind was ready? When her phone rang with Jennifer's familiar ringtone, Sarah answered while continuing to paint, adding touches of gold that somehow always found their way into her recent work. Sarah, honey, you sounded so strange when you called yesterday. Jennifer's voice was warm but concerned. What really happened after we left the party? Sarah recounted Michael's unexpected return to the house, his revelation that he was a divorce attorney, and the business card that had been burning a hole in her purse for 3 days. Wait, Jennifer interrupted. A family law attorney was working as pool maintenance at your charity event. That's either cosmic coincidence or the universe screaming at you to pay attention? That's what keeps going through my mind, Sarah admitted, pausing her brush midway to the canvas. But Jennifer, leaving David means leaving everything. I have no money of my own, no career to fall back on. He's made sure of that. Sarah, that's exactly why you need a lawyer. What did this Michael guy tell you about your options? Sarah was about to respond when a soft clicking sound from the corner of her studio made her freeze. She turned toward the noise, paintbrush still in hand, and noticed something that made her blood run cold. Jennifer, I have to call you back. Why? What's wrong? I think there's a surveillance camera in my studio. Sarah ended the call and moved carefully toward the small black device mounted behind a plant on her bookshelf. It was barely visible, professionally installed, but once she'd spotted it, she realized it had been there for months, maybe years. Her hands shook as she examined the device without touching it. How many hours of her private conversations had David been monitoring? How many intimate moments of creative expression had he been watching like some twisted reality show? How many phone calls with Jennifer had he overheard, cataloging her thoughts and feelings for future use against her? Emma kicked hard, responding to Sarah's spiking stress levels with her own distress. Sarah sat down heavily in her painting chair, one hand on her belly, trying to process this new violation of her privacy and autonomy. David's voice echoed from downstairs, discussing quarterly projections with someone on a conference call. The casual normalcy of his tone, knowing what she'd just discovered, made her physically nauseated. With trembling fingers, Sarah retrieved Michael's business card and dialed his number. Rodriguez Law Offices, this is Carmen. This is Sarah Mitchell. I need to speak with Mr. Rodriguez immediately. Mrs. Mitchell, he's in court this morning, but he left specific instructions that you should be put through to his cell if you called. Please hold. The wait felt eternal. Sarah could hear David's voice getting closer, his footsteps on the marble staircase. She'd have to pretend everything was normal while her world crumbled around her. Mrs. Mitchell. Michael's voice was calm and reassuring. What's happening? I found cameras in my art studio. He's been watching me, recording everything. The words tumbled out in a rush of fear and violation. Are you somewhere private right now? Yes, but he's coming upstairs. I can hear him. Listen carefully. Don't touch the cameras. Don't let him know you've discovered them. We'll need them as evidence of stalking and privacy violations. Can you get out of the house for a few hours? I have a prenatal appointment this afternoon. Perfect. Come to my office afterward. We need to move quickly now. David's voice was just outside the studio door. Sarah, who are you talking to? I have to go, Sarah whispered. Mrs. Mitchell, Michael said quickly. You're not alone in this anymore. Sarah ended the call just as David appeared in the doorway, his expression casually curious, but his eyes sharp with suspicion. Just confirming my appointment with Dr. Williams, Sarah said, surprised by how normal her voice sounded despite her racing heart. Good. We need to discuss some arrangements for after the baby arrives. David's tone was conversational, but Sarah now heard the underlying threat in every word. I've been researching parenting at our age, and there are some complications we need to consider. Sarah's paintbrush stilled on the canvas. She understood exactly what he was suggesting, and it had nothing to do with their baby's health. Dr. Williams says everything looks perfect, Sarah replied carefully. Doctors can miss things. I've been consulting with specialists about high-risk pregnancies. They recommend additional testing, amniocentesis, genetic counseling, that sort of thing. Emma kicked again, and Sarah's hand moved protectively over the movement. David watched the gesture with cold calculation, and she realized he was studying her reactions, cataloging her responses for future manipulation. I trust my doctor, Sarah said firmly. Trust is a luxury we can't afford when it comes to our child's well-being, David replied, moving closer. Sarah became acutely aware of the hidden camera recording every word. I've scheduled an appointment with a specialist for next week. David, I'm 38, not 18. Dr. Williams has been monitoring everything carefully. Nevertheless, we're getting additional opinions. I won't have anyone questioning our commitment to this child's health. The irony was breathtaking. The man who'd thrown her ring in a pool while threatening their marriage over the pregnancy was now positioning himself as the concerned father, protecting his child's welfare. After David left for his office, Sarah remained in the studio for several more minutes, acutely aware of being watched. She felt like an actress forced to perform normalcy while her real life collapsed behind the scenes. But as she looked at her painting of the woman at the cliff's edge, Sarah realized something had fundamentally changed. The woman in the painting had been frozen at the precipice for months, uncertain which path to take. But Sarah was no longer that woman. She was ready to jump. That evening, Sarah lay in bed listening to David's breathing settle into sleep, then waited another 30 minutes before carefully sliding out from under the covers. The marble floors were cold against her bare feet as she made her way toward the staircase, drawn by light spilling from under David's study door. She could hear his voice, low and confident, and her growing paranoia told her this conversation involved her and Emma. Moving closer, her heart pounding so loudly she was certain it would wake him. Sarah pressed herself against the wall outside the study. She'll never get half of anything, David was saying. I've been moving assets offshore for months. The Cayman accounts are completely untraceable. Sarah's knees nearly buckled as she realized she was listening to the systematic destruction of her financial future. David had been planning this while she was innocently attending prenatal appointments and preparing the nursery. What about the baby? The voice on speakerphone was tinny but recognizable, James Harrison, David's business partner. DNA test will prove it's not mine. I've already planted evidence of an affair credit card charges at hotels during her art classes. Some carefully timed receipts that suggest she was meeting someone. The methodical nature of David's betrayal was breathtaking. He'd been creating false evidence of infidelity while she'd been innocently attending pottery workshops and painting classes, building a case against her while she built a nursery for their daughter. The timing works perfectly, David continued with chilling calculation. She started acting differently about 4 months into the pregnancy, distant, secretive. Any jury will believe she was having an affair. Sarah's phone vibrated silently in her hand. A text from an unknown number. If you're listening to this, don't react. Don't let him see you. Come to my office first thing tomorrow morning. Mickamum. How had Michael known she was there? Sarah looked around the darkened hallway, suddenly aware that David's surveillance might extend beyond her art studio, and that Michael might somehow be monitoring the situation for her protection. The private investigator I hired will testify about her secret meetings during those art classes, David was saying. Between that and the financial records I've prepared, no court will award her significant assets. What about the house? Prenup covers that. She gets the Santa Monica condo and enough money to disappear quietly. Maybe a small apartment in the valley if she's smart. Sarah thought about the Santa Monica condo, a tiny one-bedroom property David had purchased as an investment. It was worth maybe $400,000, a fraction of their actual net worth. The baby kicked hard, and Sarah had to bite her lip to keep from gasping. Emma's movements were sharp and painful, as if her daughter was protesting the lies being told about her conception. By the time DNA results come back, David continued, she'll be dealing with a newborn and facing potential fraud charges. I've documented every instance of her supposed deception. Any reasonable person would conclude she's been unfaithful. Sarah realized David was talking about using her postpartum vulnerability against her, exploiting the natural challenges of new motherhood to coerce her into accepting fraudulent terms. Are you sure about this? James asked. She's been a good wife. She's been convenient. But I never signed up to be a father to someone else's child. And I won't be embarrassed by a wife who thinks she can challenge me publicly. He was referring to the charity gala, to her mild assertion that she should have input on her own recovery timeline. In David's mind, that moment of self-advocacy had been a calculated humiliation designed to embarrass him. Sarah's phone buzzed again. Stay calm. Document everything. Don't let him know you heard this. Your daughter's future depends on your ability to act normal until we can protect you both. As David's conversation continued, detailing his plans to leave her with virtually nothing while he retained control of assets worth over $50 million, Sarah felt something shift inside her. Not just Emma moving, but something deeper. For the first time in 22 years, she was making decisions based on her own needs instead of David's demands. Tomorrow, she would begin fighting back. But tonight, as she slipped back upstairs to bed, Sarah placed both hands protectively over her belly and made a promise to her daughter. This cycle of control and manipulation would end here, with her decision to fight back. Some wars, Sarah realized, were won not by strength alone, but by refusing to surrender when the enemy expected defeat. The next morning, Sarah drove through Los Angeles traffic toward Michael's Century City office, her hands gripping the steering wheel with white-knuckled intensity. Dr. Williams's prenatal appointment had gone well. Emma was healthy and active, but Sarah's blood pressure was elevated enough to cause medical concern. Stress is dangerous for both you and the baby, Dr. Williams had warned. Whatever's happening at home, you need to find ways to manage it before it affects your pregnancy outcomes. Sarah had wanted to explain about the cameras, the phone calls, the systematic planning of her destruction, but David had insisted on accompanying her to the appointment. He'd sat in the corner making notes on his phone, occasionally asking pointed questions about genetic testing and paternity establishment that made Sarah's skin crawl. Now, sitting in building traffic, she allowed herself to feel the full weight of her situation. 8 months pregnant, financially dependent on a man planning to destroy her reputation and steal her child. Living under surveillance in what should have been her sanctuary. Michael's office occupied the 20th floor of a glass tower, and the elevator ride gave Sarah time to compose herself and focus on the battle ahead. Mrs. Mitchell, Carmen Delgado greeted her warmly. Mr. Rodriguez is waiting for you. Can I get you water or herbal tea? Water would be wonderful. Thank you. Michael's office was smaller than she'd expected, but filled with law books, case files, and photographs of families who'd clearly survived difficult divorces and emerged victorious. Late afternoon sunlight through the windows created a golden warmth that felt safer than anywhere Sarah had been in months. How are you holding up? Michael asked as she settled into a comfortable chair across from his desk. I listened to more phone calls last night. He's been planning this for months. Michael, maybe years. Sarah's voice was steady, but her hands shook as she recounted David's conversation with James Harrison. Michael took careful notes, occasionally asking clarifying questions about dates, dollar amounts, and specific threats. His professional demeanor was reassuring, but Sarah could see anger building in his dark eyes as he realized the scope of David's deception. The good news, Michael said when she finished, is that your husband just handed us a roadmap to all his hidden assets. The bad news is that he's been more systematic about this than most abusers. Most abusers, Mrs. Mitchell, what David is doing isn't just divorce planning. It's financial abuse combined with psychological manipulation and evidence tampering. Several of these actions are federal crimes. Carmen knocked and entered with files. I found those precedent cases you requested. Mr. Rodriguez, hidden offshore accounts and falsified evidence in custody proceedings. Thank you, Mrs. Mitchell. I want you to meet Carmen Delgado, my paralegal and investigator. She specializes in high-asset cases involving concealed wealth. Carmen was younger than Sarah had expected, with intelligent eyes and the sort of focused energy that suggested she'd built her career on helping women in impossible situations. Mrs. Mitchell, I've been researching your husband's business dealings for 48 hours, Carmen said, opening a thick file. There are significant discrepancies in his corporate filings that suggest systematic asset concealment. What kind of discrepancies? David's company went public 3 years ago. Right, but the financial statements filed with the SEC don't match the tax returns filed with the IRS. Someone's been maintaining 2 sets of books. Michael leaned forward. Meaning, meaning he's been underreporting income to the IRS while inflating assets for investors. That's securities fraud and tax evasion. Carmen's voice carried satisfaction. We're not just talking about divorce court. We're talking about federal crimes. Sarah felt dizzy. You're saying David has been committing crimes, multiple felonies over several years, Michael confirmed. The offshore accounts James mentioned, if they're not properly declared to the Treasury Department, that's another federal violation. Your husband isn't just hiding assets from you, he's hiding them from the government. What does that mean for me? It means, Carmen said with a slight smile, that you're married to someone whose actual net worth is probably much higher than you suspected, and he's been breaking federal laws to conceal it. Michael moved to a whiteboard covered with case references. Mrs. Mitchell, in California, you're entitled to half of all marital assets. That includes David's business interests, real estate holdings, investment accounts, and any income generated during your marriage. But the prenups can be invalidated if they were signed under false pretenses or if one party concealed assets during drafting. Carmen interrupted. Based on what we've found, David was already hiding money when you signed that agreement 22 years ago. Sarah thought about their wedding day, how David's lawyers had presented the prenup as standard procedure for successful entrepreneurs. She'd been 24, naive about financial matters, and deeply in love. The possibility of deception had never crossed her mind. There's something else, Michael said gently. The false evidence, David mentioned hotel receipts, credit card charges. If he's created fraudulent documents to support fake adultery claims, that's forgery and fraud. How do we prove it? The same way we prove everything else, methodically, with expert witnesses and forensic accountants. Michael returned to his desk. Your husband thinks he's smarter than the legal system? That kind of arrogance usually leads to mistakes. Carmen pulled out another file. We've already found some of those mistakes. The credit card charges he supposedly planted to prove your affair, they were processed at hotels while you can prove you were elsewhere, gallery openings, medical appointments, family events with witnesses. How did you find that so quickly? Because David made a crucial error, Michael explained. He assumed you don't pay attention to details, but Carmen's preliminary investigation shows that you're actually very well documented. Social media posts, gallery registrations, medical records. Your life is an open book, which makes it easy to disprove false allegations. Sarah felt something she hadn't experienced in months, genuine hope. You really think we can beat him? Mrs. Mitchell, Michael said seriously. I think we can destroy his entire scheme. Legally, professionally, and financially. The question is whether you're prepared for that kind of battle. Emma kicked, and Sarah placed her hand over the movement. She thought about her daughter growing up watching her mother accept abuse and manipulation, or growing up knowing her mother had fought back against someone who'd tried to steal their future. What would happen to David if we pursue criminal charges? Federal prison, most likely. Tax evasion and securities fraud carry serious sentences, especially with the dollar amounts we're discussing. Carmen's voice was matter of fact. Plus professional disgrace, forfeiture of hidden assets, and disbarment from corporate boards. And if we just pursue the divorce, you get half of everything, full custody of Emma, and enough money to live independently forever, Michael said. But David keeps his freedom and probably continues this pattern with future partners. Sarah was quiet for several minutes, processing the magnitude of the decision before her. Through the office windows, she could see the city sprawling toward the ocean, millions of people living their lives, while her choice in this moment would determine not just her future, but potentially prevent David from destroying other women. I want to pursue everything, Sarah said finally. The divorce, the criminal charges, all of it. My daughter deserves to grow up knowing that actions have consequences. Michael and Carmen exchanged glances, and Sarah saw respect in their expressions. Mrs. Mitchell, Michael said, that's going to be a long, difficult battle. David will use every resource to discredit you and protect himself. Then we'd better get started. Sarah's voice was stronger than she'd heard it in years. What do we do first? Carmen opened her laptop. First, we document everything. Every conversation, every threat, every attempt at intimidation. We build an airtight timeline of his behavior and financial manipulations. Second, Michael added, we get you protected. Restraining orders, emergency spousal support, temporary custody arrangements that keep you and Emma safe. Third, Carmen continued, we start unraveling his financial empire. Forensic accountants, international asset tracers, experts who specialize in finding hidden wealth. Sarah thought about the cameras in her art studio, about David's confident assumption that she would never fight back. The man who'd thrown her grandmother's ring in a pool was about to discover exactly how wrong he'd been about her capacity for strength. When do we start? Sarah asked. Michael smiled, and for the first time since the charity gala, Sarah felt like she had true allies. Mrs. Mitchell, we already have. Emma kicked again, stronger this time, and Sarah chose to interpret it as approval. Her daughter would grow up knowing that some things were worth fighting for, and that women supporting each other could overcome even the most systematic abuse. Outside the office windows, the sun was setting over Los Angeles, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. Sarah watched the light change and realized that for the first time in months, she was actually looking forward to tomorrow. The battle was about to begin, but she was no longer fighting alone. 2 weeks after Sarah's first meeting with Michael's legal team, the carefully constructed facade of the Mitchell marriage began cracking in the most public way possible. Sarah was leaving her weekly prenatal appointment when David appeared in the medical building's parking structure, his usually perfect appearance disheveled, his face flushed with barely contained rage. Sarah. His voice echoed off the concrete walls with such force that other patients and visitors stopped to stare. Get in the car. We need to talk. Now. I have my own transportation. David? Sarah continued walking toward the ride-share Dr. Williams's office had arranged, one hand supporting her lower back, the other clutching her purse containing the restraining order papers Michael had prepared. Don't you dare walk away from me! David's voice rose to a shout that made an elderly woman with a walker stop and look around nervously. You think you can humiliate me, make me look like a fool in front of my business associates? Sarah realized that David had discovered the federal investigation into his financial activities. His carefully maintained public persona was disintegrating, and he was losing control in the most visible way possible. Sir, you need to lower your voice, said Dr. Peterson, a cardiologist who was helping his wife into their Mercedes. This is a medical facility, not a boardroom. Mind your own damn business, old man, David snarled, his polished CEO demeanor completely abandoned. This is between me and my wife. Sarah felt Emma responding to her elevated stress with sharp, painful movements. The Braxton Hicks contractions she'd been experiencing sporadically for the past week suddenly intensified, making her gasp and lean against a parked car for support. Sarah, get in the car immediately, David demanded, moving closer with predatory focus. We're going home, and you're going to call off your lawyers and end this ridiculous performance. I'm not going anywhere with you, Sarah managed between contractions. And this isn't a performance. David, this is me protecting our daughter from a father who'd rather destroy her mother than lose control. Our daughter, David's laugh was harsh and theatrical. You mean the bastard child you're trying to pass off as mine? I know about your affair? Sarah, I have evidence of every hotel, every lie you told. The accusations hung in the air like poison, and Sarah realized that several people were now recording the confrontation on their phones. David's public meltdown was being documented by witnesses, exactly the kind of evidence Michael had said would be crucial in court. The only lies here are the ones you manufactured, Sarah said clearly, her voice carrying across the parking structure. Fake hotel receipts, forged credit card statements, fabricated evidence of affairs that never happened. You've been planning my destruction for months, David, but you made one crucial mistake. What mistake? David stepped closer, his voice menacing enough that Dr. Peterson pulled out his phone and began dialing. You assumed I'd never fight back. Sarah's contractions were getting stronger, but her voice remained steady. You assumed the woman you controlled for 22 years would never find the courage to expose your crimes? Crimes? David's face went pale beneath his anger. I haven't committed any crimes. Securities fraud, tax evasion, money laundering, conspiracy to defraud investors, and stalking your pregnant wife. Sarah ticked off the charges on her fingers, her voice growing stronger with each accusation. Oh, and attempting to coerce a pregnant woman into signing fraudulent legal documents. That's federal crime too. David, Building security officer James Wilson had been monitoring the situation from the lobby and finally decided to intervene. "Sir, I need you to step back from the pregnant lady and lower your voice immediately. You're disturbing patients and creating a public disturbance." "I'm talking to my wife," David shouted, spittle flying from his lips. "This is a private family matter. Nothing about this conversation is private anymore," Sarah said, noting the growing crowd of witnesses with phones. "Just like nothing about our marriage was private when you installed surveillance cameras in my art studio to monitor my conversations and activities." The revelation sent a murmur through the gathering crowd. Dr. Williams appeared from the medical building, took one look at the scene, and immediately approached Sarah with professional urgency. "Sarah, are you having contractions?" Dr. Williams's voice cut through David's continued ranting. "Yes, and they're getting much stronger." Sarah winced as another wave of pain hit her. "I think the stress might be triggering early labor." "That's enough," Dr. Williams said with authority, born from decades of protecting patients. "Mr. Mitchell, your behavior is putting your wife and baby in immediate medical danger. Security, please escort this man off the property right now." "You can't make me leave." David's voice cracked with desperation and rage. "She's my wife. That's my baby." "Untrunness, sir," Security Officer Wilson said calmly. "You have exactly two choices. Leave voluntarily right now, or I call LAPD and have you arrested for trespassing, disturbing the peace, and harassment of a pregnant woman. Your choice, and you have 30 seconds to decide." Sarah felt another contraction, this one strong enough to make her cry out, and her water broke in a sudden gush that soaked her maternity dress and pooled on the concrete. "Oh my God," she whispered, looking down at the fluid. "Dr. Williams, I think Emma's coming." The doctor immediately took charge with the efficiency that comes from handling medical emergencies. "James, call 911 immediately. Sarah, we need to get you inside and lying down. The extreme stress has triggered premature labor." Premature? David's anger shifted to confusion and what might have been genuine concern. "But she's not due for 2 weeks. Severe psychological trauma can trigger early labor." Dr. Williams said coldly, her professional demeanor barely containing her anger at David. "Mr. Mitchell, your behavior has literally endangered your wife and unborn child. If anything happens to this baby, you bear direct responsibility." As medical personnel appeared and began helping Sarah toward the building, she found herself surrounded by strangers who'd become impromptu protectors. The kindness of people she'd never met stood in stark contrast to the cruelty of the man she'd been married to for over 2 decades. "Wait," David called after them, his tone shifting from rage to something approaching panic. "I want to be there for the birth. I have rights." "Mr. Mitchell." Dr. Williams turned back with the full authority of her medical degree and 20 years of experience. "You are no longer welcome in my facility. Your presence causes dangerous physiological responses in my patient. Security will ensure you remain off these premises." As they helped Sarah into a wheelchair, she could hear David on his phone, probably calling his lawyers to complain about being excluded from his daughter's birth. The irony wasn't lost on her that the man who'd spent months planning to deny paternity was now demanding parental rights in front of dozens of witnesses. "Dr. Williams," Sarah said between increasingly powerful contractions, "I need to call Michael Rodriguez. He needs to know Emma's coming early." "I'll contact him myself," Dr. Williams replied. "Right now, your only job is bringing your daughter safely into the world." As the automatic doors closed behind them, Sarah could still hear David arguing with security officers, demanding access and threatening lawsuits. His voice grew fainter as they moved deeper into the building, but his words followed her. "She can't keep me from my own child. I have constitutional rights." "Actually," Dr. Williams said quietly as they waited for the elevator, "based on the restraining order your attorney filed this morning, he has very limited rights, and after today's public display, he'll be fortunate to get supervised visitation." Sarah felt a surge of gratitude toward Michael for anticipating David's escalation and filing protective orders before the confrontation could become even more dangerous. Emma would be born into safety, protected by legal documents and medical professionals who understood the difference between concerned parenting and abusive control. The elevator doors opened, and as they rose toward the delivery floor, Sarah felt her grandmother's ring warm on her finger. The same ring David had thrown into the pool, now returned to her by a stranger who'd become her advocate and protector. Some battles were won not through confrontation, but through preparation, documentation, and the support of people who understood that protecting women and children was worth any amount of public drama. Emma was about to be born free, and David's public meltdown had just provided all the evidence any court would need to ensure she stayed that way. 4 hours later, with Emma Rose Mitchell safely nestled in her arms, Sarah lay in the hospital bed feeling simultaneously exhausted and more powerful than she'd ever felt in her life. Her daughter was perfect 7 pounds, 2 ounces of pure potential, with David's dark hair but eyes that seemed to reflect Sarah's determination rather than his manipulation. "She's absolutely beautiful," whispered Jennifer Chen, who'd rushed to the hospital as soon as Dr. Williams called her. "Look at how alert she is. Emma's taking in everything, like she knows she's got important work to do in this world." Sarah smiled, adjusting the soft pink blanket around her daughter. "Dr. Williams says she's completely healthy despite being 2 weeks early. The stress-induced labor didn't affect her development at all." "What about David? Has he tried to contact you?" "Michael's legal team has been handling all communication. Apparently, David's been calling the hospital every hour demanding visitor rights, but the restraining order keeps him out." Sarah's voice carried satisfaction rather than vindictiveness. "He can't manipulate what he can't access?" A soft knock on the door announced Michael's arrival, and Sarah was struck by how different he looked in his professional attire compared to the pool maintenance uniform where she'd first encountered him. He carried a folder of documents and the sort of focused energy that suggested significant legal developments. "How are my 2 favorite clients?" Michael asked, setting his briefcase down and approaching the bed with genuine warmth. "We're perfect," Sarah replied, repositioning Emma so Michael could see her better. "Emma slept for 2 hours straight, which Dr. Williams says is unusual for newborns. I think she inherited her grandmother's strength. And her mother's fighting spirit," Michael added with a smile. "Sarah, we need to discuss some important developments, but I want you to know that everything we're handling can wait until you're ready. Your recovery and bonding time with Emma take priority." "What kind of developments?" Michael pulled up a chair beside the bed, his expression shifting to professional mode. "David's behavior in the parking garage has accelerated several aspects of our case. The recordings that witnesses made, combined with his threats and harassment of a woman in labor, have prompted the federal prosecutor to expedite charges." Jennifer leaned forward with interest. "What does that mean?" "Exactly. It means David Mitchell is going to be arrested within the next 48 hours on federal charges including tax evasion, securities fraud, money laundering, and conspiracy to defraud investors." Michael's voice was matter-of-fact, but Sarah could see the satisfaction in his eyes. "The U.S. Attorney's Office considers him a flight risk based on the evidence we've provided." Sarah felt Emma stir in her arms, and she looked down at her daughter's peaceful face. "What about custody arrangements?" "The emergency custody hearing is scheduled for next week, but after today's public display, the outcome is essentially predetermined. No judge is going to award custody or unsupervised visitation to someone who caused his wife to go into premature labor through psychological abuse." "Sarah," Jennifer said quietly, "you should know that the videos of David's meltdown are all over social media. Malibu Charity Gala and pregnant woman abuse are trending on Twitter. The business community is already distancing themselves from him." Michael nodded grimly. "His behavior has created a public relations disaster that's separate from the legal consequences. David's reputation in the tech industry is finished, regardless of what happens in court." Emma made a soft sound, and Sarah instinctively began the gentle rocking motion that seemed to comfort her daughter. "I never wanted to destroy him, Michael. I just wanted to protect Emma and myself." "Sarah, you didn't destroy David. He destroyed himself through years of systematic fraud and abuse. You just refused to be collateral damage." Michael's voice was gentle but firm. "What you've done is protect your daughter from growing up in a home where manipulation and control were normalized." Dr. Williams knocked and entered with a tablet and professional smile. "Sarah, I need to discuss Emma's discharge paperwork and your follow-up care. But I also wanted you to know that your case has prompted our hospital to review protocols for recognizing domestic abuse in obstetric patients." "What kind of protocol changes?" We're implementing mandatory training for all staff on identifying financial and emotional abuse patterns in pregnant women. What you experience, the surveillance, the psychological manipulation, the systematic planning to exploit postpartum vulnerability, these are red flags we need to recognize and address. Dr. Williams's voice carried the authority of someone committed to protecting future patients. Your courage in fighting back is literally going to help other women. Sarah felt tears threatening, but they were tears of purpose rather than pain. Dr. Williams, would you be willing to testify about the medical effects of psychological abuse during pregnancy? Absolutely. What David put you through constitutes medical neglect and abuse by proxy. Your elevated blood pressure, the premature labor, the stress-induced complications, all of that is documented evidence of harm caused by his behavior. Michael made notes on his legal pad. That medical testimony will be crucial in both the criminal case and custody proceedings. Dr. Williams, would you also be available for the federal prosecutor's case? I'll testify anywhere necessary to ensure that what Sarah experienced is recognized as the serious crime it actually is. As Dr. Williams left to complete the discharge paperwork, Sarah realized that her decision to fight back had created ripple effects she'd never anticipated. Her story was becoming part of a larger conversation about recognizing and addressing domestic abuse, particularly the sophisticated financial and psychological manipulation that often goes undetected. Michael, Sarah said, adjusting Emma's blanket, what happens next, not just legally, but practically? Where do Emma and I go from here? Short term, you're going to the secure apartment we've arranged in Santa Monica. It's fully furnished, has excellent security, and overlooks the ocean. Long term, Michael smiled. Long term, you're going to be one of the wealthiest single mothers in California, with complete control over your life and Emma's future. Jennifer squeezed Sarah's free hand. Sarah, honey, you did something incredible. You not only saved yourself and Emma, but you're probably going to prevent David from doing this to other women? Emma opened her eyes at that moment, looking directly at her mother with the sort of focused attention that seemed impossible for such a tiny person. Sarah felt an overwhelming sense of connection and purpose. Emma Rose, Sarah whispered to her daughter, you're going to grow up knowing that your mother fought for your freedom before you were even born. You'll never have to wonder if you deserve respect and equality, because you'll see it demonstrated every day. Michael gathered his documents and prepared to leave. Sarah, get some rest. The legal battles are just beginning, but the hard part, finding the courage to fight back, that's already done. Everything else is just paperwork and court appearances. As evening settled over Los Angeles, Sarah sat in the hospital bed holding her daughter and watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of pink and gold. Through the window, she could see the city sprawling toward the ocean, full of possibilities she'd never imagined when she was trapped in David's web of control. Emma fell asleep in her arms, breathing with the easy rhythm of someone who'd been born into safety rather than chaos. Sarah thought about her grandmother, who'd survived war and displacement to build a new life in America, and realized that women's strength often passed from generation to generation like an invisible inheritance. The ring on her finger caught the last rays of sunlight, sending small rainbows dancing across the hospital room wall. Some treasures were worth fighting for, and Sarah was finally beginning to understand that she and Emma were treasures too. 3 days after Emma's birth, Sarah sat in Judge Patricia Santos's courtroom, her daughter sleeping peacefully in her arms while David's legal team attempted to explain away months of systematic fraud and abuse. The emergency custody hearing had been expedited due to the circumstances surrounding Emma's premature birth and David's increasingly erratic public behavior. Your Honor, David's attorney, Robert Bradley, argued with visible desperation, my client's alleged financial irregularities have no bearing on his fitness as a father. He simply wants reasonable access to his newborn daughter. Judge Santos, a stern woman in her 50s with silver hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing, reviewed the substantial stack of evidence Michael's team had compiled. The documentation was overwhelming: offshore accounts, forged documents, surveillance equipment, and witness testimony from multiple sources, including the medical center confrontation. Mr. Bradley, Judge Santos said dryly, your client's alleged financial irregularities include $85 million in concealed assets, fraudulent tax returns spanning 5 years, and conspiracy to commit securities fraud. These aren't irregularities. These are federal crimes under active investigation. Michael sat at the plaintiff's table, his presence radiating calm authority. Beside him, Carmen had organized evidence files with military precision, creating a visual representation of David's systematic deception that was impossible to ignore. Furthermore, Judge Santos continued, her voice carrying the weight of 20 years on the bench, the evidence demonstrates systematic psychological abuse specifically designed to manipulate Mrs. Mitchell into accepting fraudulent settlement terms. Dr. Williams's medical testimony confirms that Mr. Mitchell's behavior directly caused the premature labor that endangered both mother and child. David sat beside his lawyer, his usually immaculate appearance showing signs of strain from 3 days of legal disasters. Federal agents had frozen his accounts, seized business records, and issued warrants for documents from his offshore banking contacts. The man who'd thrown Sarah's ring into a pool to demonstrate his power was discovering what genuine powerlessness felt like. Your Honor, Michael addressed the court with measured authority. Mrs. Mitchell requests full legal and physical custody of Emma Rose Mitchell, with Mr. Mitchell's visitation rights limited to supervised contact pending resolution of federal criminal charges. Mr. Bradley, does your client contest Mrs. Mitchell's fitness as a mother? Judge Santos asked pointedly. No, Your Honor, but we question the timing and motivation behind these sudden allegations. Mrs. Mitchell never complained about financial issues until she began consulting with divorce attorneys. Sarah felt Emma shift slightly in her arms and looked down at her daughter's perfect features. Emma had been born healthy and alert, with an unusual calm that seemed to suggest she understood she was safe now. Mr. Bradley, Judge Santos's voice carried clear warning. Your client hired private investigators to spy on his pregnant wife, installed surveillance cameras in her private spaces, and created fabricated evidence of adultery to use against her. These actions are documented and corroborated by multiple independent witnesses. Furthermore, Michael added, standing to address the court, Mr. Mitchell's own recorded conversations reveal explicit plans to exploit Mrs. Mitchell's postpartum condition to coerce her into accepting fraudulent settlement terms. He specifically stated that new mothers are too exhausted and hormonal to understand complex financial arrangements. Carmen approached the bench and handed certified transcripts to the court clerk. Your Honor, these are verified transcripts of Mr. Mitchell's conversations with business partner James Harrison, recorded on multiple dates in October. Mr. Mitchell explicitly discusses using his wife's physical and emotional vulnerability after childbirth to manipulate her into signing away her legal rights. Judge Santos read the transcripts, her expression growing colder with each line. Sarah watched the judge's face and realized that David's own words were destroying any remaining credibility he might have had. Mr. Mitchell, Judge Santos addressed David directly, did you actually tell your business partner that new mothers are too overwhelmed to understand financial documents? David stood slowly, his face flushed with a combination of embarrassment and trapped anger. Your Honor, I was simply concerned that complex legal proceedings might interfere with my wife's recovery and bonding time with our daughter. Mr. Mitchell, according to these transcripts, you described your wife's postpartum condition as a strategic opportunity for manipulation, not a period requiring protection and support. That's not paternal concern. That's predatory behavior toward a vulnerable new mother. Sarah felt Emma's breathing steady and calm against her chest, and she was struck by how different this courtroom felt compared to the hospital parking garage where David had lost control. Here, in this formal setting, the truth was being methodically established and documented, creating a permanent record of David's character and intentions. Your Honor, Michael continued, Mrs. Mitchell also requests immediate spousal support of $60,000 per month, access to marital accounts for living expenses, and exclusive use of the Santa Monica property during divorce proceedings. $60,000 a month, Robert Bradley objected with theatrical outrage. That's excessive by any reasonable standard. Mr. Bradley, Judge Santos replied with barely contained impatience, your client has been concealing income and assets worth approximately $120 million. $60,000 per month represents less than 6% of the marital estate's actual value. If anything, Mrs. Mitchell's request demonstrates remarkable restraint. Carmen approached the witness stand with a folder of financial documents and forensic accounting reports. Your Honor, our investigation has identified hidden assets, including real estate holdings, in 5 states. investment accounts in multiple offshore jurisdictions, and business interests that were never disclosed during the marriage or to tax authorities. Mr. Mitchell, Judge Santos addressed David with judicial authority that brooked no evasion. You understand that concealing assets from your spouse necessarily means concealing them from the Internal Revenue Service, correct? Your Honor, I've always filed complete and accurate tax returns, David protested, but his voice lacked conviction. Then you'll have no difficulty explaining why your reported income to the Treasury Department is 70% lower than your actual earnings, as documented by your company's internal accounting records and forensic analysis of your financial transactions. The courtroom fell silent except for Emma's soft breathing and the occasional rustle of legal documents. Sarah realized she was witnessing the complete dismantling of David's carefully constructed lies, accomplished entirely with his own documentation and recorded statements. Mr. Mitchell, Judge Santos continued with the finality of someone who'd seen enough evidence. The documentation suggests you've been simultaneously planning to defraud your wife, your business partners, and the federal government. That level of systematic deception raises fundamental questions about your judgment, character, and fitness for any parental responsibilities. Your Honor, Robert Bradley made one desperate final attempt. My client has no history of violence or substance abuse. Surely financial disputes don't warrant complete separation from his newborn child. Mr. Bradley, your client systematically planned the psychological and financial destruction of his pregnant wife while she was carrying his child. He created false evidence, conducted illegal surveillance, and explicitly planned to exploit her postpartum vulnerability for his personal gain. That's not a financial dispute. That's psychological warfare against a new mother and her baby. Sarah felt overwhelming gratitude that Judge Santos understood the full scope of what David had intended to do to her and Emma. This wasn't about money, it was about power, control, and the systematic destruction of a woman's autonomy. This court finds, Judge Santos announced with finality, that Mr. Mitchell poses a substantial and ongoing risk to the emotional and financial well-being of both mother and child. Mrs. Mitchell is awarded temporary full custody of Emma Rose Mitchell, with Mr. Mitchell's parental rights limited to 2 hours of supervised visitation per week. Pending resolution of federal criminal proceedings, David shot to his feet, his composure finally cracking completely. Your Honor, you cannot keep me from my daughter. I have constitutional rights as a father. Mr. Mitchell, you forfeited those rights when you chose to treat your wife and unborn child as obstacles to your financial schemes rather than as family members deserving protection and love. Judge Santos's voice was absolute. Sit down immediately, or I'll hold you in contempt. Furthermore, the judge continued as David reluctantly returned to his seat, Mrs. Mitchell is awarded exclusive use of the Santa Monica property, immediate access to all marital accounts necessary for living expenses, and temporary spousal support of $60,000 per month. Mr. Mitchell's assets remain frozen pending federal investigation, but sufficient funds will be released to ensure Mrs. Mitchell and the baby's needs are met. Michael leaned over to whisper to Sarah, We won everything we requested, and more than we hoped for. Sarah looked down at Emma, who had slept peacefully through the entire proceeding, despite the life-changing decisions being made around her. She'll never have to wonder if her mother was strong enough to protect her, Sarah whispered back. Mr. Mitchell, Judge Santos addressed David one final time. You are hereby ordered to surrender your passport to this court and to have absolutely no contact with Mrs. Mitchell except through counsel. Any violation of this order will result in immediate arrest and permanent revocation of all visitation rights. As the gavel fell, Sarah felt 22 years of fear and control finally release their grip on her life. Emma stirred and opened her dark eyes, looking directly at her mother as if to say, We did it together. David's business partner, James Harrison, who had been subpoenaed to testify about the financial irregularities, approached Sarah as they left the courtroom. Mrs. Mitchell, I want you to know that David's business partners had no knowledge of his personal financial arrangements. We're cooperating fully with federal investigators and implementing new oversight procedures. Thank you, Mr. Harrison. I hope this doesn't destroy your company's reputation. The company will survive by demonstrating that we don't tolerate fraud or abuse in any form. What David did to you was unconscionable, and we're committed to ensuring nothing like this ever happens again within our organization. As they walked through the courthouse lobby, Sarah saw David arguing intensely with his lawyer near the elevators. His face was flushed with rage and humiliation, but for the first time in their 22-year marriage, his anger couldn't touch her or her daughter. "Mrs. Mitchell," Michael said as they reached the courthouse steps, "you should know that the federal prosecutor wants to meet with you next week. Your testimony will be essential in the criminal case against David. What kind of sentence is he looking at? With the evidence we've compiled and his behavior in court today, probably 18 to 25 years in federal prison, plus complete forfeiture of all assets obtained through fraudulent means." Michael's voice carried professional satisfaction. "David Mitchell is going to spend the next 2 decades learning what it feels like to have no control over his circumstances." Carmen joined them on the courthouse steps, her arms full of legal documents and evidence files. "Sarah, the forensic accountants completed their final assessment. Your share of the legitimate marital assets comes to approximately $58 million. Sarah almost laughed, thinking about David's plan to leave her with a small condo and grocery money. "Instead, I'm about to become financially independent beyond anything I ever imagined." "Financial independence doesn't even begin to cover it," Carmen said with genuine satisfaction. "You're going to have the resources to help other women in situations like yours, if you choose to." As they walked toward Michael's car, Sarah thought about the journey from that charity gala pool deck to the courthouse steps. 4 months ago, she'd been a controlled, monitored wife with no knowledge of her own financial situation or legal rights. Today, she was a free woman with the resources to build whatever life she chose for herself and Emma. "Michael," Sarah said as they reached the parking structure, "I have a question that's not about legal proceedings." "What's that?" "Are you still working weekends as a diving instructor?" Michael smiled, and Sarah realized it was the first time she'd seen him look genuinely relaxed since their first meeting by the pool. "Actually, I was thinking about taking some time off from the weekend job." "Why do you ask?" "Because Emma and I are going to need swimming lessons eventually, and I'd prefer to learn from someone I trust completely." As they drove through downtown Los Angeles toward Sarah's new life, Emma slept peacefully in her car seat, unaware that she'd just inherited a world where women supporting each other could overcome even the most sophisticated forms of abuse. The afternoon sun painted the city in shades of gold, and Sarah realized that for the first time in 22 years, she was looking toward the future with excitement rather than fear. Some victories were worth every moment of the battle that earned them. 6 months later, on a warm Saturday morning in March, Sarah stood on the deck of her new Santa Monica home, watching Emma gurgle happily in her bouncy seat while the Pacific Ocean sparkled in the morning light. The 3-bedroom craftsman house was modest compared to the Malibu mansion, but every room belonged entirely to her and Emma, free from surveillance and the oppressive weight of David's control. "Good morning, Oz, sweetheart," Sarah cooed to Emma, who responded with a toothless grin and enthusiastic arm waving. At 8 months old, Emma was a happy, healthy baby who seemed to thrive in their peaceful environment. The sound of footsteps on the wooden deck announced Michael's arrival for their weekly coffee tradition, which had evolved from legal consultations into something more personal and meaningful. He'd taken to bringing toys for Emma and fresh pastries from the 3rd Street Promenade Farmers Market. "How are my 2 favorite clients this morning?" Michael asked, settling into the chair beside Emma's bouncy seat. The legal proceedings were finished, but their friendship had grown into something neither had expected. "We're absolutely perfect," Sarah replied, pouring coffee from the French press. "Emma slept through the night 4 times this week, and I finished 3 new paintings yesterday for the Venice Gallery show next month." "Business is good," Sarah smiled as she thought about her new art studio, a converted garage where she taught painting classes to other women rebuilding their lives after difficult divorces. "More than good. I have a waiting list of students, and the LA Times wants to do a feature on my Liberation Series paintings." The Liberation Series consisted of 15 large canvases depicting women at various stages of breaking free from controlling relationships. The centerpiece showed a woman diving into deep water to retrieve something precious, painted in shades of blue and gold that seemed to glow with inner strength. "Any updates from David's legal situation?" Sarah asked, though she inquired more from professional curiosity than personal concern. "His sentencing is scheduled for next week. The federal prosecutor is recommending 22 years, with forfeiture of all assets obtained through fraudulent means. Michael's tone was matter-of-fact. David Mitchell's career in financial manipulation is officially over. Sarah felt no satisfaction in David's downfall, only deep relief that he could never again use money in psychological manipulation to control vulnerable women. The divorce settlement had been finalized 4 months ago, awarding Sarah $63 million in assets and full custody of Emma, with no visitation rights for David pending completion of his prison sentence. Dr. Williams called yesterday, Sarah said, watching Emma play with a colorful teething ring. She wanted to thank me again for speaking at the medical conference about recognizing domestic abuse in prenatal care. How did that presentation go? Incredibly empowering. When I described the surveillance cameras, the financial manipulation, the systematic planning to exploit postpartum vulnerability, you could see recognition in their eyes. Many of those doctors and nurses had treated patients with similar warning signs, but hadn't known how to intervene effectively. Michael reached over and gently tickled Emma's feet, making her laugh with pure delight. The sound filled the morning air with joy. What about the foundation? Have you decided on the structure? Sarah had been developing plans to establish a foundation helping women navigate high-asset divorces complicated by financial abuse. I'm calling it the Jade Foundation, after my grandmother's ring. We'll provide legal funding, forensic accounting services, and emotional support for women facing systematic financial manipulation. That's beautiful, Sarah. Your grandmother would be incredibly proud. Sarah looked down at the jade ring on her finger, still warm and comforting after all these months of freedom. You know what she'd be most proud of? That Emma will grow up knowing her mother was strong enough to fight for both their futures. Emma babbled something that sounded almost like words, and both adults turned their attention to her with delight. The baby was reaching for Sarah's ring, fascinated by the way it caught the morning sunlight and created tiny rainbows on the deck. Michael, Sarah said quietly, can I ask you something personal? Of course. Why do you really work weekends as a diving instructor? I know you said it was for balance, but there's more to it, isn't there? Michael was quiet for a moment, watching the waves roll onto the beach below them. My mother was trapped in a marriage similar to yours. Not as financially complex, but the same patterns of control and systematic manipulation. She never had the resources or support network to fight back effectively. When she died 10 years ago, she was still trapped in that relationship, still believing she somehow deserved the treatment she received. I'm so sorry. When I became a lawyer, I promised myself I'd help women like her whenever possible. The diving instruction keeps me grounded in the natural world, reminds me that there's beauty and peace beyond legal battles and courtroom victories. Sarah reached over and squeezed his hand, feeling the calluses from weekend diving work. Thank you for saving us. Sarah, you saved yourself and Emma. I just provided some of the tools you needed. As if responding to their conversation, Emma dropped her teething ring and looked directly at Michael with the serious expression she sometimes wore when processing new information. Then she smiled brilliantly and reached for him, and Sarah watched with warmth as Michael carefully picked up her daughter. Emma Rose Mitchell, Michael said with mock solemnity, you are going to grow up knowing that you are loved, protected, and surrounded by people who believe in your unlimited potential. And she'll grow up understanding that women supporting each other can overcome any obstacle, Sarah added with conviction. Later that afternoon, Sarah carried Emma down to the beach for their daily walk along the water's edge. The baby loved watching the waves and listening to seagull calls, responding to the ocean's rhythm with a contentment that mirrored her mother's hard-won peace. As they walked, Sarah reflected on a question someone had asked at Dr. Williams's medical conference. How do you recognize when staying becomes more dangerous than leaving? The answer, Sarah had realized, varied for every woman, but there were universal warning signs. When someone systematically undermines your confidence, monitors your activities without consent, controls your finances, or plans to exploit your vulnerabilities for their advantage, staying becomes a threat to your survival and your children's future. The most difficult part, Sarah had told the medical professionals, isn't recognizing abuse patterns. It's believing you deserve better treatment and finding the courage to demand it. But sometimes you don't discover your own strength until you have someone else who depends on you to be brave. Emma gurgled and pointed at a pelican soaring overhead. and Sarah found herself thinking about how dramatically different her daughter's childhood would be from her own restricted upbringing. Emma would grow up with financial security, emotional support, and the daily example of a mother who had refused to accept manipulation and control as normal relationship dynamics. "You know what someone asked me recently?" Sarah said aloud to Emma. "They wanted to know how I recognized when to leave David. The truth is, I didn't realize I was strong enough until I had you to protect. Sometimes we discover our courage not for ourselves, but for the people who need us to be fearless." Emma babbled what sounded like enthusiastic agreement, and Sarah laughed with pure joy. The sound echoed across the beach, mixing with ocean waves and seagull calls to create a symphony of freedom and infinite possibility. As the sun began to set over the Pacific, painting the sky in brilliant shades of pink and gold, Sarah thought about all the women still trapped in relationships like her marriage to David. The Jade Foundation would help some of them, but real change would come from women sharing their stories, supporting each other's strength, and refusing to accept abuse as the price of financial security. "This is what happiness sounds like," Sarah whispered to Emma as they turned back toward their home. The baby responded with a contented sigh, and Sarah smiled as she realized that for the first time in 22 years, she was exactly where she belonged, free, financially independent, and surrounded by people who valued her authentic self rather than what she could provide for their convenience. Her grandmother's ring caught the last rays of sunlight, sending rainbow patterns dancing across the sand, and Sarah knew that some treasures were indeed worth any battle required to protect them. The ring had survived war, displacement, and systematic abuse to arrive at this moment of peace and unlimited possibility. As they climbed the steps to their deck, Sarah could see Michael through the kitchen window, washing coffee cups and organizing toys Emma had scattered during their morning together. Emma waved enthusiastically when she spotted him, and Sarah felt her heart expand with gratitude for finding love built on mutual respect rather than control and manipulation. The ocean waves continued their eternal rhythm below, and Sarah understood that this wasn't an ending, but a beginning. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, fresh opportunities to help other women discover their strength, and countless moments of joy with her daughter. But tonight, as she settled Emma into her crib and listened to the peaceful sounds of their home by the sea, Sarah was simply a woman who had fought for her freedom and won, surrounded by love that asked for nothing in return except the opportunity to grow stronger together. Emma's breathing settled into the deep rhythm of contented sleep, and Sarah smiled as she realized that victory looked exactly like this: quiet, peaceful, and full of infinite possibility. 1 year after Emma's birth, Sarah stood before a room filled with 50 women at the Beverly Hills Hotel, each of them survivors of financial and emotional abuse, who had found the courage to rebuild their lives. The Jade Foundation's first annual symposium was exceeding every expectation, bringing together survivors, legal professionals, and advocates to share resources and support. "When I was pregnant with my daughter," Sarah began, her voice carrying clearly across the elegant ballroom, "my husband threw my grandmother's ring into a swimming pool because I suggested I might need time to recover after giving birth. That ring had survived the Cultural Revolution in China, hidden in a jar of rice for 3 years while my grandmother fled persecution." The audience was completely silent, understanding that they were hearing a story that mirrored their own experiences of systematic control and manipulation. What I didn't know at the time was that a divorce attorney was working as pool maintenance at that charity event. Michael Rodriguez dove into chlorinated water to retrieve my family heirloom. But more importantly, he helped me understand that what I was experiencing wasn't a difficult marriage. It was systematic abuse designed to destroy my independence and steal my future. Emma, now a confident toddler, played quietly in the corner under the watchful eye of her nanny, occasionally looking up at her mother with the sort of focused attention that suggested she understood the importance of what was happening. The man I was married to for 22 years had been planning my financial and emotional destruction for years. He installed surveillance cameras in my art studio, created false evidence of affairs that never happened, and planned to use my postpartum vulnerability to coerce me into signing away my rights to our marital assets worth over $60 million. Dr. Patricia Williams, now the Foundation's medical advisor, nodded from the front row. She'd become a powerful advocate for recognizing domestic abuse in healthcare settings, training medical professionals across California to identify and respond to patterns of systematic control. "But here's what I learned," Sarah continued, her confidence growing with each word. Abusers like David depend on their victims remaining isolated, uninformed, and convinced that they're powerless. The moment we connect with people who understand our situation and start documenting the abuse, their entire system of control begins to collapse. Michael sat at a table near the back, Emma periodically toddling over to show him toys or seek reassurance. Their relationship had evolved naturally from attorney-client to friendship to something deeper, built on mutual respect and shared commitment to helping other families escape systematic abuse. The Jade Foundation has helped 43 women navigate high-asset divorces in our first year of operation, Sarah announced to enthusiastic applause. Our average settlement is $3.2 million, and not one of our clients has had to accept the manipulative terms their abusers initially offered. Carmen Delgado, now the Foundation's Director of Investigations, approached the podium with a presentation remote. Sarah, would you like me to share some of our success statistics? Please do, Carmen. The screen behind Sarah lit up with impressive numbers: 43 successful cases, $138 million in assets recovered for survivors, 0 custody awards to abusive partners, and most importantly, 43 children now living in homes free from systematic manipulation and control. But the numbers only tell part of our story, Sarah continued. The real success is measured in the fact that these children will grow up watching their mothers demonstrate strength, independence, and refusal to accept abuse as normal relationship dynamics. Emma chose that moment to toddle over and climb into Sarah's arms, eliciting warm laughter from the audience. At 13 months old, she was walking confidently, talking in short sentences, and displaying the sort of fearless curiosity that came from growing up in an environment of safety and encouragement. This is Emma, Sarah said, settling her daughter on her hip. She was born into freedom instead of control, and she'll never have to wonder if her mother was strong enough to protect her future. Emma waved at the audience with the confidence of someone who'd been surrounded by strong women her entire life, then pointed at Michael and said clearly, Mike. The room erupted in delighted laughter as Michael approached the podium, and Emma reached for him with the trust of a child who'd never experienced betrayal or manipulation from the men in her life. Emma has excellent judgment, Sarah said as Michael took her daughter into his arms. She's never known a world where men use their power to control and diminish women. That's the future we're building through this foundation. Jennifer Chen, now the foundation's board chair, stepped forward with a folder of documents. Sarah, I think this is the perfect moment to share our expansion announcement. What expansion? The Jade Foundation is opening offices in San Francisco, Seattle, and New York over the next 18 months. We've received funding commitments of $12 million from women who've survived similar situations and want to help others find their strength. The applause was thunderous, and Sarah felt tears of gratitude rather than pain for the first time in years. What had begun as her personal battle for survival had grown into a movement helping women across the country. There's something else, Jennifer continued with a mischievous smile. The California legislature has passed the Mitchell Act, requiring all divorce attorneys to receive training on identifying and documenting financial abuse in high-asset marriages. Sarah felt momentarily dizzy as she realized that her story was now part of legal history, protecting future generations of women from the systematic manipulation she'd endured. The Mitchell Act, she repeated, testing how the words sounded. My grandmother would never have imagined that her jade ring would someday lead to legislation protecting women's rights. Emma babbled something that sounded like commentary on the proceedings, making Michael laugh and the audience smile with delight at her precocious confidence. I want to close with something my grandmother told me when I was Emma's age, Sarah said, reclaiming the microphone. She said that jade becomes more beautiful under pressure, that heat and time transform ordinary stone into something precious and strong. I think that's true for women too. The standing ovation lasted several minutes, and as Sarah looked out over the faces of women who'd survived their own battles with systematic abuse, she understood that her story was part of a much larger transformation happening across the country. After the formal presentation, small groups gathered around the ballroom, survivors connecting with advocates, sharing resources, and building the sort of support networks that made escape from abuse possible. Sarah moved between conversations, Emma confidently exploring the room under Michael's protective watch. Mrs. Mitchell. A young woman approached hesitantly, clearly nervous about interrupting. I'm Rebecca Santos. I'm 8 months pregnant, and my husband has been, well, he's been doing some of the things you described. Sarah immediately gave Rebecca her full attention, recognizing the fear and uncertainty she'd felt just 2 years ago. Rebecca, are you somewhere safe right now? I think so. He doesn't know I'm here today, but I found cameras in my studio apartment last week, and he's been making comments about how expensive babies are. How maybe we're not ready for parenthood. Rebecca's voice shook as she described the familiar patterns of control and manipulation. Carmen, Sarah called across the room. Could you join us, please? Carmen approached immediately, her expression shifting to professional mode as she recognized a client consultation in progress. Rebecca, I'm Carmen Delgado, the Foundation's Director of Investigations. Let's find somewhere private to talk. As Carmen guided Rebecca toward a quiet corner, Sarah felt the familiar surge of protective anger that had motivated her to fight back against David's abuse. Every woman who found the courage to seek help represented someone else's daughter, someone else's future that could be saved from systematic destruction. She's going to be okay, Michael said quietly, Emma now asleep in his arms despite the bustling activity around them. You've built something that actually works. Sarah, Rebecca won't have to figure this out alone. I keep thinking about how many women are still trapped in situations like mine was, Sarah replied, watching Carmen's professional competence as she documented Rebecca's situation. How many are being told that their concerns are unrealistic, that they should be grateful for financial security, even when it comes with surveillance and control? Dr. Williams approached with her tablet full of notes from conversations with other attendees. Sarah, I've identified at least 6 women today who are showing classic signs of systematic abuse, elevated blood pressure, anxiety responses to financial discussions, hypervigilance about their partner's reactions. We're catching these situations earlier because of the training programs you've funded. What's our next step with those cases? Carmen's team will follow up within 48 hours, and will prioritize the pregnant women for immediate safety planning. Dr. Williams's voice carried the authority of someone who'd become an expert in recognizing and treating abuse-related medical symptoms. Your story has literally saved lives, Sarah. As the symposium wound down and attendees began departing, Sarah found herself alone with Emma and Michael on the hotel's garden terrace. The Los Angeles sunset painted the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink, and Emma was finally awake enough to enjoy the colorful display. Look, Emma, Sarah pointed toward the horizon. Pretty colors. Pretty, Emma repeated enthusiastically, then pointed at Michael. Mike pretty. Michael laughed with genuine delight. Emma, you're going to be a heartbreaker when you grow up. She's going to be strong, Sarah corrected with certainty. She's going to know her worth and refuse to accept anything less than complete respect and equality. Like her mother, Michael said, shifting Emma to his other arm so he could take Sarah's hand. Sarah looked down at their intertwined fingers and realized that this was what healthy love looked like: supportive, respectful, built on shared values rather than control and manipulation. Emma would grow up seeing this example instead of the systematic abuse that had defined Sarah's marriage to David. Michael, there's something I've been wanting to discuss with you, Sarah said as they watched Emma chase butterflies among the garden flowers. What's that? The foundation is growing faster than I anticipated, and I'm going to need a legal director who understands both family law and organizational management. Someone I trust completely. Michael was quiet for a moment, understanding the implications of what Sarah was suggesting. That would mean giving up my private practice. It would mean joining something bigger than individual cases. We're changing how the legal system responds to financial abuse. Michael, we're literally rewriting the rules to protect women and children. Emma toddled back to them carrying a flower she'd picked, offering it to Sarah with the generosity of someone who'd never been taught to hoard affection or resources. Thank you, sweetheart, Sarah said, accepting the flower and tucking it behind her ear. This is perfect. Perfect, Emma agreed enthusiastically, then turned to Michael with expectant arms. As Michael lifted Emma for another garden exploration, Sarah realized that her definition of perfection had completely transformed over the past 2 years. It wasn't about elegant mansions or social status or financial security obtained through dependence on someone else's control. Perfect was Emma's laughter echoing through the garden. Perfect was helping Rebecca and women like her find the courage to fight back against systematic abuse. Perfect was building something meaningful with someone who valued her strength rather than trying to diminish it. Sarah, Michael said as Emma discovered a fountain and began splashing enthusiastically. I think I'd like to join the foundation. If you'll have me. Michael Rodriguez, I would be honored to work with you on changing the world, one survivor at a time. As they walked back toward the hotel lobby, Emma chattering happily about flowers and fountains and pretty colors, Sarah thought about the journey from that charity gala pool deck to this garden terrace. 2 years ago, she'd been a controlled wife with no knowledge of her own worth or legal rights. Tonight, she was building a movement that would protect thousands of women and children from the systematic manipulation she'd survived. Her grandmother's ring caught the last rays of sunlight, sending familiar rainbows dancing across the terrace stones. Some treasures were indeed worth fighting for, and Sarah was finally beginning to understand that she and Emma and all the women finding their courage through the Jade Foundation were treasures too. 18 months after the Foundation's first symposium, on a crisp December morning, Sarah stood in the Santa Monica courthouse wearing a simple cream-colored dress, her grandmother's jade ring catching the winter sunlight streaming through tall windows. This courthouse looked nothing like the imposing building where she'd fought for Emma's custody. This was a place of beginnings rather than battles. Are you ready, Mrs. Mitchell? Asked Judge Maria Santos, the same woman who'd protected Sarah and Emma during the custody hearing. The fact that Judge Santos was officiating their wedding felt like the universe completing a circle of justice and healing. I've been ready for this my entire life, Sarah replied, looking toward the courthouse entrance where Michael would appear any moment with Emma. Now a confident 2-year-old who'd insisted on carrying the wedding rings in a special basket, Carmen Delgado and Dr. Patricia Williams sat in the front row as witnesses, their presence representing the community of women who'd supported Sarah's journey from victim to survivor to advocate. Jennifer Chen was coordinating the small reception afterward, determined to celebrate this marriage with the same attention she'd once devoted to charity galas in Sarah's previous life. The courthouse doors opened, and Emma burst through with characteristic enthusiasm, her dark curls bouncing as she ran toward her mother carrying a small wicker basket decorated with ribbons. Mama rings, Emma announced proudly, holding up the basket for everyone to see. Perfect, sweetheart, Sarah said, kneeling down to Emma's level. Are you ready to help Mama and Michael get married? Yes, Mary, pretty dress. Emma spun in her own miniature cream-colored dress, a gift from Jennifer who'd insisted that Emma needed to look like the princess she was. Michael followed Emma into the courthouse, and Sarah felt her heart skip as she saw him in his navy suit, looking nervous and happy and more handsome than anyone had a right to be. Unlike her first wedding, which had been an elaborate production designed to display David's wealth and social status, this ceremony was about love, commitment, and the family they'd chosen to build together. How are my 2 favorite girls? Michael asked, approaching them with the easy confidence Emma had inspired in him from their first meeting. We're ready to be a real family, Sarah replied, standing and smoothing Emma's dress. Emma, can you show Michael the rings? Emma held up the basket with ceremony, carefully lifting out 2 simple gold bands that Sarah and Michael had chosen together. No enormous diamonds or status symbols, just beautiful, classic rings that represented their commitment to equality and mutual respect. Beautiful work, Emma, Michael said solemnly, accepting his ring from her small fingers. You're the best ring bearer in the history of weddings. I'm the best, Emma agreed with the confidence of someone who'd never been told to diminish herself for other people's comfort. Judge Santos smiled as she watched their interaction. I have to say, this is one of the most joyful courtrooms I've seen in my 20 years on the bench. Sarah, Michael, Emma, are you ready to become a legal family? We've been a family for months, Sarah said, taking Michael's hand while Emma positioned herself between them. We're just making it official. The ceremony was brief but meaningful, focusing on promises of partnership, respect, and shared commitment to building a home where Emma could grow up surrounded by love instead of control. When Judge Santos pronounced them married, Emma cheered and threw flower petals from her basket, filling the courthouse with laughter and celebration. I now pronounce you husband and wife, and Emma's official family. Judge Santos announced, Michael, you may kiss your bride. The kiss was gentle and full of promise, interrupted by Emma tugging on both their hands and demanding, kiss Emma too. They both kissed Emma's cheeks, making her giggle with delight. And Sarah realized that this moment contained everything she'd never known she wanted: a partner who loved her strength instead of trying to control it, and a daughter who would grow up knowing that marriage could be based on respect and mutual support. As they signed the marriage certificate, Carmen approached with an envelope bearing the foundation's logo. "Sarah, I know you said no wedding gifts, but this arrived yesterday and I thought you should see it." Sarah opened the envelope to find a letter from Rebecca Santos, the pregnant woman who'd approached her at the foundation's first symposium 2 years ago. "Dear Sarah," the letter began, "I wanted you to know that my daughter Isabella was born healthy and free, thanks to your courage and the support of the Jade Foundation. I'm writing this from my own apartment, with full custody and a settlement that will allow Isabella and me to build whatever life we choose. You saved us both, and I will spend the rest of my life helping other women find their strength the way you helped me find mine. Congratulations on your wedding. Isabella and I are celebrating with you from San Diego." Sarah felt tears of joy rather than pain as she realized that her story continued to create ripple effects she'd never imagined. Rebecca's freedom meant Isabella would grow up like Emma, knowing that women deserve respect and equality as basic human rights. "What is it?" Michael asked, seeing Sarah's emotional response to the letter. "It's a reminder that fighting back against abuse isn't just about saving yourself," Sarah replied, showing him Rebecca's letter. "It's about saving all the children who won't have to grow up in homes where control and manipulation are normalized." Emma, who'd been examining the wedding certificate with intense curiosity, looked up at them with the serious expression she wore when processing important information. "Mama happy?" she asked, studying Sarah's face with the emotional intelligence that came from growing up surrounded by authentic feelings instead of performed ones. "Mama's incredibly happy," Sarah confirmed, picking Emma up and spinning her around. "We all live together now, and we're a real family." "Family," Emma repeated enthusiastically, then pointed at Michael. "Daddy." The word hung in the air with profound meaning. Emma had started calling Michael Daddy several months ago, understanding instinctively that fathers were supposed to be protective and loving rather than controlling and manipulative. Michael's eyes filled with emotion every time she used the word. "That's right, sweetheart," Michael said, his voice thick with love. "I'm your daddy now, and I will always protect you and Mama." As they left the courthouse for the reception Jennifer had organized at a beachfront restaurant in Santa Monica, Sarah thought about how different this wedding day felt from her first one. 24 years ago, she'd married David in an elaborate ceremony that had been more about displaying his success than celebrating their love. Today, she'd married Michael in a simple ceremony that was entirely about the family they'd built together and the future they were choosing to create. The reception was small but perfect: close friends, foundation colleagues, and Emma charming everyone with her confident personality and boundless energy. Dr. Williams gave a toast about the healing power of authentic love. Carmen spoke about the importance of surrounding ourselves with people who celebrate our strength. And Jennifer cried happy tears as she talked about watching Sarah transform from a controlled wife into a powerful advocate for women's rights. "I want to say something too," Sarah announced, standing with Emma in her arms and Michael beside her. 2.5 years ago, I thought my life was over. I was pregnant, trapped in a marriage built on control and manipulation, and convinced I was too weak to protect myself or my baby. The small group of guests listened intently, understanding that they were hearing a story of transformation that went far beyond individual healing. What I didn't understand then was that strength isn't something you either have or don't have. It's something that grows when you're surrounded by people who believe in your worth and refuse to let you settle for less than you deserve. Emma babbled something that sounded like commentary, making everyone laugh and lightening the emotional weight of Sarah's words. "Michael saw my worth before I did. Carmen and Dr. Williams gave me tools to fight back. Jennifer never stopped believing I could build a better life. And Emma." Sarah kissed her daughter's forehead. "Emma gave me someone worth fighting for when I couldn't fight for myself. But here's what I've learned about healing from abuse," Sarah continued, her voice growing stronger. "It's not enough to escape. You have to build something better in the place where the abuse used to live. The Jade Foundation, this marriage, the life we're building together, all of it grew from refusing to let David's cruelty define our future." Michael took Sarah's free hand and squeezed gently, his silent support allowing her to continue sharing her story without fear of judgment or manipulation. Emma will grow up knowing that love is supposed to feel safe, that partnerships should be based on mutual respect, and that no one has the right to control another person's finances, choices, or dreams. That's our gift to her, and through the foundation, it's our gift to thousands of other children who will grow up free from the patterns of abuse that trapped previous generations. The applause was warm and sustained, and as Sarah looked around the table at the faces of people who'd become her chosen family, she realized that this was what victory looked like, not the dramatic courtroom triumph she'd experienced 2 years ago, but the quiet, daily choice to build something beautiful in the place where control and manipulation used to live. As the reception wound down and the sun began to set over the Pacific, Sarah found herself alone with Emma and Michael on the restaurant's deck, watching waves roll onto the beach where she'd taken her first steps toward freedom 2 years ago. "Mrs. Rodriguez," Michael said, testing out the sound of her new name. "How does it feel to be married to someone who thinks you're perfect exactly as you are?" Sarah considered the question seriously, thinking about how different this marriage felt from her first one. "It feels like coming home to myself," she said finally. "Like I can finally stop performing acceptability and just be authentically myself." Emma, who'd been unusually quiet during the adult conversation, suddenly pointed at the waves and announced, "Ocean swimming." "Not today, sweetheart," Sarah laughed. "But when you're older, Michael will teach us both how to swim properly." "I promised your mama I'd teach her to dive for lost treasures," Michael said, lifting Emma so she could see the waves better. "Some things are worth going underwater to retrieve." Sarah thought about her grandmother's ring, still warm on her finger after all these years and adventures. Some treasures were indeed worth fighting for, worth diving into dangerous waters to protect. But the most precious treasure of all was the life they were building together, Emma's laughter, Michael's steady love, the foundation's growing impact, and the daily choice to heal instead of remaining broken. As they walked back toward their car, Emma fell asleep in Michael's arms, exhausted from the excitement of the day, but secure in the knowledge that she was surrounded by people who would always prioritize her well-being over their own convenience or control. "Ready to go home, Mrs. Rodriguez?" Michael asked as he settled Emma into her car seat. "I've been ready for this life my entire existence," Sarah replied, understanding that she was no longer running away from something terrible, but running towards something wonderful. The drive home took them along the Pacific Coast Highway, the same route she'd traveled 2 years ago when she left David's house for the final time. But everything about this journey felt different. She was traveling toward a future built on love, rather than away from a past defined by control. Emma slept peacefully in her car seat, and Sarah realized that her daughter would grow up with memories of safety, celebration, and the daily example of adults who treated each other with respect and genuine affection. That was perhaps the greatest victory of all, breaking the cycle of abuse that could have continued for another generation. Home was their Santa Monica house, where no cameras monitored private conversations and no one's moods were subject to another person's approval or control. Home was where Emma's artwork covered the refrigerator, where Michael's diving equipment sat beside Sarah's painting supplies, and where every decision was made through discussion and mutual respect. As they carried Emma inside and settled her into her crib, still wearing her cream-colored flower girl dress, Sarah understood that this was what healing looked like, not the absence of all difficulties, but the presence of people who chose love over control, growth over stagnation, and authentic connection over performed perfectibility. "Happy wedding day, Mrs. Rodriguez," Michael whispered as they stood watching Emma sleep. "Happy new life, Mr. Rodriguez," Sarah whispered back, knowing that their real adventure was just beginning. 5 years after their wedding, Sarah stood before the largest audience she'd ever addressed, over 800 women, attorneys, and advocates gathered at the Los Angeles Convention Center for the Jade Foundation's 5th annual symposium. Emma, now 7 years old and confidently articulate, sat in the front row beside Michael, occasionally waving at her mother with the unselfconscious pride of a child who'd never been taught to diminish her enthusiasm. "When I began this journey 8 years ago," Sarah said, her voice carrying clearly across the vast auditorium, "I thought I was just trying to save myself and my unborn daughter from a marriage that had become a prison of surveillance and control. I had no idea I was joining a movement that would transform how our legal system recognizes and responds to financial abuse. The screen behind her displayed impressive statistics. 847 successful high-asset divorce cases, over $2.3 billion in assets recovered for survivors, 200 children now living in homes free from systematic manipulation, and most significantly, the Mitchell Act had been adopted by 42 states, requiring standardized training for divorce attorneys on identifying and documenting financial abuse. But numbers only tell part of our story, Sarah continued, gesturing toward the audience filled with women who'd found their strength through the foundation's support. The real measure of our success is in the children who are growing up watching their mothers demonstrate that abuse is never acceptable, regardless of how wealthy or sophisticated the abuser might be. Dr. Patricia Williams, now the Foundation's chief medical officer, stood to address the audience. Sarah, would you like me to share the latest research on intergenerational impacts of domestic abuse prevention? Please do, Dr. Williams. The screen switched to medical research data showing dramatic improvements in stress-related health conditions among children of domestic abuse survivors who'd received comprehensive support. What we're seeing, Dr. Williams explained, is that children like Emma, who grew up in households where abuse was recognized and eliminated, show resilience patterns that break cycles of trauma that can persist for generations. Emma chose that moment to stand up and wave enthusiastically at the audience, her 7-year-old confidence filling the massive space with warmth and laughter. Unlike children who'd grown up walking on eggshells around unpredictable adults, Emma moved through the world with the security that came from knowing she was unconditionally loved and protected. Emma has never seen her mother accept disrespect or manipulation, Sarah said, beaming at her daughter. She's never watched adults use money, threats, or emotional manipulation to control each other. She's growing up believing that relationships should be based on mutual respect and authentic affection, and she'll never accept anything less. Carmen Delgado, now the Foundation's executive director, approached the podium with a thick folder. Sarah, I think this is the perfect moment to share our expansion announcement. What expansion? The Jade Foundation is going international. We've received funding to open offices in London, Toronto, Sydney, and Dublin over the next 2 years. Women worldwide have been requesting our assistance with high-asset divorces complicated by cross-border financial manipulation. The applause was thunderous, and Sarah felt momentarily overwhelmed by how far they'd come from that terrifying night when she'd discovered surveillance cameras in her art studio. What had begun as her desperate attempt to protect herself and Emma had grown into a global movement, helping women escape sophisticated forms of abuse. There's something else, Carmen continued with obvious excitement. Harvard Law School has established the Mitchell Fellowship for studying financial abuse and family law. The first recipient will be Rebecca Santos, who many of you remember from our early symposiums. Sarah felt tears of pride as she thought about Rebecca, the pregnant woman who'd approached her fearfully at their first small gathering. Rebecca had not only survived her own abusive marriage, but had gone to law school specifically to help other women navigate similar situations. Rebecca's daughter Isabella is now 5 years old, Sarah announced to the audience. She's growing up watching her mother work as an advocate for women's rights, just like Emma is growing up seeing that women can build successful careers while maintaining loving families based on respect rather than control. Michael stood and approached the podium, Emma immediately running to him with the absolute trust of a child who'd never experienced betrayal from the men in her life. I want to say something as Emma's father and Sarah's husband, Michael said, his voice carrying the authority of someone who'd spent years witnessing the transformation of abuse survivors into powerful advocates. Men need to understand that supporting women's independence and strength doesn't diminish our role as partners and fathers. It enhances it. Emma will grow up expecting to be treated with respect because she's seen her mother demand and receive nothing less. Emma tugged on Michael's sleeve and whispered something in his ear, making him smile and lift her up so she could see the audience better. Emma wants to say something, Michael announced, holding the microphone down to her level. Thank you for helping my mama, Emma said clearly, her 7-year-old voice carrying across the auditorium with startling confidence. My mama helps ladies be strong, and now I want to help ladies be strong too when I grow up. The standing ovation lasted several minutes, and as Sarah looked out over hundreds of faces, survivors, advocates, legal professionals, she understood that Emma's words represented the ultimate victory. The next generation was growing up believing that helping women escape abuse was normal. necessary work that everyone should support. After the formal presentations, the ballroom buzzed with smaller conversations as survivors connected with resources, advocates shared strategies, and new friendships formed based on shared commitment to ending financial abuse. Sarah moved between groups, Emma confidently at her side, both of them comfortable in this community of strong women supporting each other. Mrs. Rodriguez. A young woman approached hesitantly, clearly nervous about interrupting. I'm Maria Gonzalez. I'm 6 months pregnant, and my husband has been, well, he's been doing exactly what you described in your presentation. Sarah immediately gave Maria her full attention, recognizing the fear and uncertainty she'd experienced 8 years ago. Maria, are you somewhere safe right now? I think so. He doesn't know I'm here today, but I found monitoring software on my computer last week, and he's been making comments about how maybe we can't afford a baby after all. Maria's voice shook as she described the familiar patterns of control and financial manipulation. Emma looked up at Maria with the serious expression she wore when adults were discussing important matters, then tugged on Sarah's dress and whispered, Mama, the scared lady needs help. That's right, sweetheart, Sarah replied, always amazed by Emma's emotional intelligence. Carmen, could you join us, please? Carmen approached immediately, her expression shifting to professional mode as she recognized an urgent client situation. Maria, I'm Carmen Delgado, the Foundation's director. Let's find somewhere private to talk about your options. As Carmen guided Maria toward a quiet consultation area, Emma watched with the focused attention of someone who understood that important work was happening. Mama, why was the lady scared? Emma asked with the directness that came from growing up in an environment where difficult topics were discussed honestly rather than hidden or minimized. Some people try to control other people using money and fear, Sarah explained, kneeling down to Emma's eye level. The lady was scared because someone has been trying to control her, but Carmen is going to help her be safe and strong. Like how Michael helped us be safe. Exactly like that, sweetheart. Remember how Michael dove into the swimming pool to get Grandmama's ring? Sometimes people need help getting back things that belong to them. Their safety, their money, their choices about their own lives. Emma nodded with the satisfaction of someone who'd received an explanation that made sense of the adult world around her. When I grow up, I'm going to help scared ladies too. I know you will, Emma. You're going to be an amazing advocate for other women. As the symposium concluded and attendees began departing, Sarah found herself on the convention center's outdoor terrace with Emma and Michael, watching the Los Angeles sunset paint the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink. Look how pretty, Mama, Emma said, pointing at the colors spreading across the horizon. At 7, she had Sarah's artistic eye and Michael's analytical mind, combined with a confidence that came from growing up surrounded by adults who celebrated her intelligence rather than trying to diminish it. Very pretty, Sarah agreed, thinking about how much their definition of beauty had evolved over the years. It wasn't about expensive settings or status symbols anymore. It was about moments like this, surrounded by people who loved her authentically and work that made a meaningful difference in other people's lives. Sarah, Michael said, shifting Emma to his other arm so he could take her hand. I want you to know how proud I am of what you've built. 8 years ago, you thought you were just trying to survive David's abuse. Today, you're literally changing laws and saving lives. We're changing laws and saving lives, Sarah corrected. Emma, you're part of this too. Every time you show other little girls that they can be confident and strong, you're helping build the world we want for all children. Emma beamed with pride, understanding that she was part of something important, even if she didn't fully grasp the scope of the foundation's impact. As they walked back toward their car, Sarah's phone buzzed with a text from Rebecca Santos. Watch the live stream from Boston. Isabella and I are so proud of you and Emma. The fellowship at Harvard is going to allow me to research international financial abuse patterns. We're going to help women all over the world find their strength. Sarah showed the message to Michael, feeling the familiar surge of gratitude that came from knowing her decision to fight back 8 years ago continued to create opportunities for other women to escape abuse and build better lives. Ready to go home? Michael asked as they reached their car. Emma already climbing into her booster seat with the independence of someone who'd been encouraged to be capable rather than helpless. I'm ready for our whole life, Sarah replied. Understanding that she was no longer running toward or away from anything, she was simply living authentically in the present moment, surrounded by love instead of control. The drive home took them through Santa Monica toward their house by the ocean, where Emma's artwork covered the refrigerator. Michael's diving equipment sat beside Sarah's painting supplies, and every decision was made through discussion and mutual respect. Home was where no one monitored private conversations, where Emma's questions were answered honestly, and where all three of them were free to be their authentic selves without performance or fear. As they settled Emma into bed that night, she looked up at them with a serious expression that meant she was processing something important. "Mama, are you happy we helped all the scared ladies today?" "I'm incredibly happy, sweetheart, and I'm proud that you want to help scared ladies too when you grow up. I think helping people is the most important job," Emma said with 7-year-old wisdom. "More important than making money or being famous." Sarah and Michael exchanged glances over Emma's head, both understanding that their daughter was growing up with values they'd had to learn through painful experience. Emma would never have to unlearn the belief that her worth depended on someone else's approval, or that financial security was worth accepting abuse. "You're absolutely right," Sarah said, tucking Emma's blankets around her. "Helping people is the most important work anyone can do." As they turned off Emma's light and left her room, Sarah realized that this ordinary moment, putting their daughter to bed after a day of meaningful work, represented everything she'd fought to achieve. Not wealth or status or revenge against David, but the simple freedom to build a life based on authentic values and genuine love. 8 years after that charity gala in Malibu, Sarah understood that her grandmother's ring had been worth diving for, not because of its monetary value, but because it represented the strength that passed from generation to generation among women who refused to accept abuse as normal. Emma would grow up wearing that ring someday, carrying forward the legacy of women who chose courage over compliance, independence over dependency, and love over control. That was perhaps the greatest victory of all, ensuring that the cycle of abuse ended permanently, replaced by a legacy of strength that would protect future generations of women and children. Some treasures were indeed worth any battle required to protect them, and Sarah was finally living in a world where she and Emma and thousands of other women were treasures too precious, protected, and free to shine as brightly as they chose. The ocean waves continued their eternal rhythm outside their windows, and Sarah fell asleep knowing that tomorrow would bring new opportunities to help other women discover their strength, surrounded by a family built on respect and authentic love rather than control and manipulation. The ring that had started it all rested safely on her nightstand, still warm with the strength of all the women who had worn it, ready to inspire the next generation of survivors to fight for their freedom and their children's futures.